Good evening. 306 days since the Iowa caucuses, and believe it or not, it all comes down to tonight. Welcome to MSNBC's coverage of Election Night. I'm David Gregory alongside Keith Olbermann and Chris Matthews. We are also joined tonight by our very large table by Rachel Maddow and Eugene Robinson. Eugene of the Washington Post. Well, Keith, let's start with you. I mean, whatever happens tonight, one thing we can say for sure, this has been one heck of a campaign and an historic day, an historic level of engagement on the part of voters across this country.
If there's an early storyline before we get to find out what happens tonight, David, it is clearly this. People got in line at 6 o'clock this morning with the anticipation that they'd be finished when they're finished. That people who have been waiting for this vote, whether it be for, as you said, 300 plus days or 8 years or since 1619 in some respects, metaphorically speaking, they were determined to be in line. One of the things I think we'll see as the evening goes on, and I don't know that we have an exit poll question that pertains to this, but it seems apparent from these long lines across the country in every kind of weather that there is a historical souvenir collecting kind of vote here that may be the biggest demographic that we're going to see tonight. People who want to be part of this election in a way we may not have seen before, certainly not since 1960.
We are expecting historic turnout. It could jump from 2000 to 2004. It could be up. We could have 130, 140 million people. What feels, Chris, different about today to you?
I have never recalled an election that people wanted so much to happen. They want this presidential election. They want it to be a chance to vote for change, no matter whether it's Obama or McCain. I've been struggling. What is it that they want they don't have? And I'm not sure this is the result tonight. We don't know. But I struggled. Is it a smarter president, a more acute president, a president more on the job, a tougher president? I think it's hope. I think they want at the end of these wars that don't seem to end, at the sense of an economy that seems to be going down for a long time. The word, I think, is hope. And I know that's Obama's slogan. And it may be lucky for him that it is, but I think that's what they want.
You know, Rachel, the unfortunate truth is that the next president comes into office knowing neither peace nor prosperity. And after 8 years of a Bush administration, which is very unpopular. So there's no question that there's a tremendous desire for change today.
Absolutely. And when you think about in modern history, when the last time was that we had a vice president for whom there was no question that they would ever run. There was never even a glimmer of a thought that Dick Cheney would run to continue this administration. And it was known when he was first picked for the ticket, probably in 2000, in the campaign in 1999. To know that there is a full stop, there is a period at the end of this sentence, and something new will start politically. But the country is in such a deep hole with these two wars, with the financial crisis, with so many broken systems, including the broken election system, which is giving us the lines that we're seeing today. To know that politics changes 180 degrees no matter what, but the country has so far to go is, I think, a moment of incredible tension and anxiety, even if it is somewhat of a pleasant anxiety for the country.
Gene, this is historic. We've got an African-American presidential candidate for the Democrats. We have a woman who's on the ticket for the Republican Party. And you've got voters who are going today bringing their kids to the polls because they want to remember this day.
There is a sense we're going to overuse the word historic tonight, and as well we should. Keith mentioned 1619. That's when the first African slaves landed at Jamestown 389 years ago. That's how long we've been struggling with the issue of race in this country. The idea that an African-American man could be elected president, just the idea that he could be, that he's on the ballot, that he was shown by pre-election polls to be ahead, it has made a lot of people I've talked to today feel privileged. The gentleman on Election Plaza just a while ago came up to me and said, "Don't you feel privileged to be able to cover this?" And I thought back to growing up in Orangeburg and at the end of Jim Crow and going to segregated schools and you know, coming to this moment in my lifetime. It is really amazing. It was really amazing.
Joe Scarborough is with us as well. Joe, we know the landscape of where we start for this race. Obama's ahead going into Election Day, and now we're waiting for the voters to speak. What are you looking for tonight?
Well, of course, we're all looking at Iowa at the very beginning. If Barack Obama wins Iowa, then the election's over pretty darn quickly. Not Iowa, I'm sorry, Indiana. If Obama wins in Indiana, it's over very quickly. Then we move over to Virginia. But I'm like the rest of you. I'm excited about the lines. I want to see the voting turnout. I think history is going to be made tonight, despite whoever wins. We're going to have the largest turnout ever, David. No doubt about that. It's going to shatter the record of 4 years ago. And remember, we went from one election to another. We kept hearing about how it was a choice between the lesser of two evils. Well, how exciting that the last two election cycles will have produced the greatest turnout in the history of American politics. So exciting. People forget that John Kerry got more votes than any other Democratic candidate ever. He just happened to have less votes than George W. Bush. So an exciting night. We're going to see records shattered and, of course, the possibility of real history being made.
All right, Joe, thanks very much. Also with us tonight, MSNBC analyst Pat Buchanan. And Pat, one of the things we know about the electoral map, which we'll talk a good deal about tonight, is that John McCain is playing a lot of defense on that map compared to the George Bush states from 2004.
Well, he certainly is. I don't know any Kerry state from 2004 that is really imperiled now. And it looks like that Barack Obama has picking up Iowa and maybe picking up Colorado. And so and all the rest of the game is being fought on red turf. And Obama's ahead in something like half of 5 of 10 states. So I think it's a very, very tough road for McCain to travel. But let me say this. I do think this. I know what the American people are voting against, the Republican Party and what we have. And I know who they're voting for, Obama, in which people are investing extraordinary hope and expectation. But I don't know that they're voting for some particular agenda as they're voting for possibility. So this election, I think, carries with it the great potential for disillusionment down the road, as some others have.
Pat, would that description of what people were voting for, would that not match up to some degree with what they were voting for with Ronald Reagan in 1980, that there was as much, as the popular phrase of the brief Carter administration suggested, malaise in the country that needed less a specific set of platform planks and more of a heartening? Is that not a comparison suitable historically?
It's certainly partly true. They were voting to be rid of Carter and all he represented, and they embraced Ronald Reagan. But Ronald Reagan was a man with a clear-cut conservative, no pale pastels agenda, and folks sort of knew they were getting. Let's take, for example, the Congress, where I think you could see 25 Republicans wiped out in the House. You could see 6, 8, 9 Republicans wiped out in the Senate. And the Congress of Pelosi and Reid will be strengthened enormously, but that Congress is at 10% approval. I know who the people are voting against, but what exactly are they voting for?
They might be voting for, in most cases, a reinvestment in the public sector, Pat, a reinvestment in the possibilities of government action in energy and healthcare and infrastructure, a boring word, but an important word. There's a sense that we've let things drift in the public sector for 40 years. Reagan was an immensely successful president in terms of the national morale, but he did set us in a direction towards putting most of our chips on the private sector through deregulation, through less taxes. It worked to some extent, but we let atrophy the important regulation we needed in the financial sector, in airlines, which we all experience all the time. In all kinds of areas, regulation has been lax. And we've also lost, I think, commitment to building things. It used to be that government didn't write hot checks to Wall Street. It actually constructed bridges and highways and subways. And I think people would like to see that done again. And Barack is advocating that very thing, a reinvestment in the public sector. So I don't think it's a blank slate, Pat, at all.
But as you know, Chris, the public sector is going to be about $1 trillion in deficit this year.
But not because of doing things, but because of failures on the part of the current crowd.
Okay, you can say failures. I don't mind that. But look, what I'm saying is he doesn't have the money to do it. Secondly, the last time we went down this road, 1964, 65, Chris, you know it ended in utter disillusionment in 1968, and that's my point. Government, I don't think big government liberalism has any more the answer than neoconservatism,
Could be. That's the debate.
Which has just failed.
Patrick, that's the debate the American voters are having as they go to the polls today. Your point of view and Barack Obama's point of view. We'll see how it works out.
Okay. I'm not running against Obama.
No, you are, but you're arguing against him already, which is fair enough. It's what we do.
Our first result of the night, Pat Buchanan is not running against Barack Obama. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Chuck. With Joe, we'll be talking to you later on. We're going to go to Chuck Todd now, our political director for MSNBC and NBC News. And Chuck, what do we look for tonight? The description of threading the needle has been mentioned here. How small a needle is it really for John McCain?
Well, it's very small. And what's amazing about, I think, tonight is how quickly we get an idea of how the night's going. I mean, at 7 o'clock with Indiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and Georgia's polls all closing, we get to find out 4 things very quickly. Virginia, one of these new battleground states that Obama's tried to put into play, we'll find out if those polls have been right and if we can call it pretty quickly. Indiana, we get to find out really how bad is, how angry is the electorate at the Republicans. In Kentucky, we found out about the drive for 60 because, frankly, it's the Mitch McConnell seat, the Senate Republican leader who will know quick. And in Georgia, how big is the African-American turnout going to be? So in these first 4 states, polls closing at 7 o'clock, the entire election, in some ways, we're going to learn so much right there at 7 o'clock.
And Tom Oliphant had this map that got down to like 7 or 8 counties and precincts and cities around the country. And he starts in a place called Vigo County, Indiana. Yeah. Tell me about it. Why is it a bellwether? Why is it a forecaster?
Well, you're hitting me with a county that I haven't researched, Keith, and I'm going to absolutely do that right
Our second result of the night. We haven't had that yet.
I tell you, you were doing that on purpose, so that's fine. But the fact is, we are going to learn in a couple of things. I go to Florida. I look at Orange County in the 8th Congressional District. A Republican there is struggling to run for re-election, Rick Keller. He's a canary in the coal mine. You tell me that district's gone, Democrats winning that district, that tells me Obama is going to carry the state of Florida because that guy's only crime was being a Republican in a district that led Republican. South Carolina, there's another congressional candidate I'm looking at there that's going to tell me how big was this African-American turnout, how huge was this surge in the 1st congressional district. So those are my canaries in the coal mine. I mean, I obviously, Tom's are very good. You hit me with one, but hey, I'll research.
Hey,
I'll come back.
Chuck, it's David here
next time, brother.
Chuck, I have a question for you. As we look at the potential Obama voters, we talk a lot about African Americans, younger voters, Latino voters, but the reality is that Obama, as a Democratic candidate and somebody who's run a very good campaign, has the potential to increase margins among white voters. A trend that Bill Clinton started. We're talking about white, more upscale voters, college-educated and beyond, in the suburbs. That could be a significant trend tonight.
It's 2 states, actually. We talk about all this, but there were 2 states in particular when you looked at 2004 that didn't look like the others, and they were just what you were describing, David. Virginia and Colorado. These are 2 states. They're in the top 10 of the youngest states, and all the other states were already blue states. Virginia and Colorado were red states. In the highest college-educated top 10 states, Virginia and Colorado were 2 of the only red states that President Bush carried. And then you talk about income levels. Virginia and Colorado, 2 of the higher income level states that President Bush carried in 2004. So when you look at there, it's this white college-educated voter that President Bush won this vote by 10 points in 2004. There really wasn't a difference, a big difference between non-college-educated whites and college-educated whites. This time there could be a big one, and I think that's the reason why we're seeing polls the way they are in Colorado and in Virginia, and why those 2 were always considered the first 2 attempts to expand the map. I mean, it is no secret about Virginia, and I think you're absolutely right. The story about African-American turnout is big, but the story of the Republicans losing among college-educated whites is just as significant. And it's something that the New York Times op-ed crowds like David Brooks and some of the intellectual conservatives, George Will and Peggy Noonan, it frustrates them. They don't like that.
All right, and Chris can talk about Pennsylvania in a microcosm later on as we go on looking at this particular voters. Chuck, thank you very much. We'll be talking to you throughout the night. We're going to take a short break here, and then the game comes back. When we come back, we're going to talk to our correspondents covering Obama and McCain tonight, find out what both campaigns are feeling tonight. It's all over except the voting and now the counting. Our coverage continues right after this.
MSNBC's coverage of the 2008 presidential election is brought to you by Liberty Mutual.
The Japanese have been coming down to Antarctica, and over the years, they've killed literally tens of thousands of whales. And what they want to do is do full-scale whaling. It's up to us to stop it.
Premieres Friday at 9, only on Animal Planet. Presidents have the power.
Ask
not what your country can do for you.
To change lives.
Ask what you can do for your country.
To change course. To change America. As a new president prepares to lead, watch MSNBC and experience the power of change.
We are back on MSNBC, our election night coverage. Ron Allen is at Grant Park in Chicago, where Obama's campaign is holding its rally. Ron, the backdrop there, still rather sparse, but it promises to be a pretty big affair tonight.
David, it's going to be an incredible event here. It's unprecedented. It creates some security issues for police who are saying they may have to turn people away if it gets past a certain number of people. In the immediate area here, they're going to let in 75,000 people with tickets, but there will be many tens of thousands more who will be trying to get near this place. I have to tell you, I've been traveling around this country all year, and I have seen incredible excitement and enthusiasm out there that has been building and building right up until this moment. There is I think politics has become something for ordinary people, ordinary families, something it never was before. The people that you meet at rallies and the people who will be here at this event tonight were probably apolitical before this, but now, because of Obama, because of Palin, because of Hillary Clinton, because of John McCain, they have just excited the American public in a way that I don't think many of us have ever seen before. There's a lot, of course, at stake. This is a big issue election, the war, the economy, just to name some of the things that are on people's minds. So tonight, I think it's just going to be an amazing time to witness what happens here. Of course, the Democrats and Barack Obama, Joe Biden feel victory is at hand. I was on the plane with Joe Biden earlier today, and I was struck by how relaxed and how confident he was. At one point, he was holding sort of a press conference with one of his granddaughters, Finnegan, and talking about what it might be like to be living in Washington, how that might affect the family. Of course, cautioning that he doesn't want to get too far ahead of himself, but it's been striking just how confident the Democrats are, how confident Biden has been, how loquacious he has been over the past couple of days, because they just feel that victory is at hand. This place is obviously going to explode. We have a ringside seat. We're about 40 yards from the main podium. It's right there behind us. A beautiful picture of the Chicago skyline there in the distance. Most people will be looking at it in this direction. The head-on shot is this way, but this area is going to fill up with hundreds of thousands of people from this area coming to see, to get a glimpse, to be a part of history. There's no doubt that history is being made tonight. It's been made so many other occasions through the primary and through the general election campaign. There is history that's going to be made today here and in Phoenix, and the American public is really glued to their seats. They just want to see this, want to feel this, and there is a lot of hope and optimism that something really positive is going to come out of all this.
All right, Ron Allen in Grant Park tonight, where the Obama campaign will stage a huge party. The outcome, of course, will determine the extent of the party, but certainly the plans are in place. Ron, thanks very much. Savannah Guthrie is in Phoenix tonight at McCain campaign headquarters. And Savannah, no matter what happens in the run-up to these final days to this election day, it has been difficult for the McCain campaign. They recognize that they are up against something very difficult today. The polls have been against them, and that map is looking rather tricky.
It is indeed, but yet you don't see long faces around this ballroom. I've spoken to volunteers here who are very hopeful. You know, there's this almost myth around John McCain as the comeback kid, as somebody who has defied the odds repeatedly in his life. And many people here are hoping that that happens again, big time tonight. They believe that the momentum is on their side. I've had more than one senior advisor say to me, we feel like we're really hitting our stride. Some have said, we wish there was another month in this campaign because we've really got it together. They feel like some of these themes they've hit hard on in the last few days and weeks of the campaign, with Joe the plumber hitting Obama hard on taxes, hitting them with this prospect of having a very left-wing liberal takeover of Washington, as they like to put it. They think these are themes that have resonated, and they think there could be an upset tonight. We don't see a lot of long faces. We see a lot of people hoping for a great story out of Phoenix tonight.
All right, Savannah Guthrie there at McCain headquarters tonight in Phoenix. And Keith, a little bit of news today.
Yeah, it never rains, but it pours. It's been a rough ride, ups and downs, as the cliches go, for Senator McCain, and that apparently got literally and terrifyingly a little worse today. More drama, according to Chicago Tribune writer Jill Zuckman. The Straight Talk Air, the 737 with which they continue to campaign even on this date of the election, David, was on the verge of landing in Albuquerque when it suddenly pulled up abruptly, canceled the landing, aborted the landing, circled around, as Jill Zuckman writes, teetered back and forth uncomfortably, and finally landed safely. The most important part, at 2:07 p.m., the report inside the plane was there was traffic on the runway. So apparently this was might fall into that FAA category of near miss. There's a further report from the correspondent with Time magazine, Michael Shear. The press cheered and sang "Highway to the Danger Zone," a regular campaign rally favorite.
In 2000, we were with Senator McCain at the time coming back into Arizona before the primary. The plane was hit with lightning on the descent, and I'm not even sure he woke up. The old fighter pilot as we were going.
Okay. And Senator Obama had one of these during the campaign early in the summer too, where there was an aborted landing, as we've had one right back.
We had an aborted
Senator
landing
McCain has just arrived here safely, apparently.
All right, we'll return to all this and update you as warranted. Meantime, Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina is with us. He is a Republican and supports Senator McCain for president. Senator, welcome.
David, good to be with you.
What is your outlook in your state, which has become a battleground in this cycle, whether the Republican Party wants it or not?
Well, the outcome in North Carolina tonight is not in question. John McCain's going to win North Carolina. And that's despite over $30 million being spent by Barack Obama. But the exciting thing is the fact that there's enthusiasm around the country. Rural America showed up for this vote. And it's going to be voters today that decide the outcome of it, and not necessarily pollsters.
No question. We also know that at least the projections are for record turnout, which is just good news as Americans that we're engaged in this process, engaged in the election and showing up to vote. But if there is a jump in voters, some 14%, if we get up to 130, 140 million, do you not fear that that creates a huge political advantage for Senator Obama?
Oh, absolutely not. I will use North Carolina as a microcosm of the rest of the country. We saw a large African-American turnout in early vote. We haven't seen that today. They haven't been able to sustain it. Yet rural America probably voted for the first time since they voted for Ronald Reagan. That's usually more conservative. It's Democrat, it's Independent, it's Republican. Certainly a big turnout helps John McCain.
A big turnout in North Carolina helps John McCain?
Big turnout around the country helps John McCain. If South Central Pennsylvania votes, John McCain wins Pennsylvania. If Southeast Ohio votes, John McCain wins Ohio. If Southwest Virginia goes to the polls, Virginia is going to go in the Republican column.
Senator, if there was some tightening in polls in some of these key battlegrounds in the final days in John McCain's favor, it was based on what, in your judgment?
I think it was based on the fact that a lot of the electorate had just focused on the two candidates, even in a 2-year-long presidential race. And they found that John McCain really did represent their values, their beliefs. And to be real candid, the American people are scared. And I think when you're scared, you turn to somebody with a very predictable background and somebody who they feel confident has their trust to be commander-in-chief.
Are you concerned, Senator, that white voters with 4 years of college are increasingly voting Democratic, that there's a trend there among the people with higher educations?
Well, I'm not sure that there's a trend. I think that what you've seen is you've seen some miserable campaigns, Chris, over the last couple cycles. But this is a cycle that even with the amount of money that Senator Obama had, even with the fact that the economy is now clearly the top issue, John McCain technically should probably be behind 15 points today. He's not. He's in a dead heat for the presidency of the United States, and I believe tonight he's going to win the presidency.
Wow.
A two-part question, Senator. How is Senator Dole going to do this evening, and what exactly did you mean by scared?
I think that the American people have seen their savings cut in half. They've seen the future of their employment in question. And when that happens, they don't do risky things, and they don't turn to people with a limited amount of experience. They turn to somebody that they feel the level of trust is high enough. Senator Dole's in a tight race, but I think that John McCain's margin in North Carolina will pull Elizabeth Dole over the goal line.
All right, Senator Richard Burr, thank you very much. Chris?
Okay, thank you. Let's bring in Bishop T.G. Jakes. He's, of course, founding pastor of the Potter's House Church down in Dallas, Texas. Bishop, thank you for joining us. I think there's a potential spiritual quality to tonight's voting, and I'd like you to talk about it.
Well, you know, I think it's of strong interest to people of faith. This is a very interesting election for all people. As a senior pastor of the Potter's House, I've had an opportunity to interact with quite a few people of faith, and I think it really resonates with them, some concerns, some issues. And I've never, ever seen the excitement, the enthusiasm, and the amount of people who have turned out in Texas. They have done early voting. I polled my church. 90% of my church had already voted before Sunday. So people are motivated from every stream and every walk of life to participate in the electoral process.
Are people in your community, in your congregation, thinking fully about the, I'm asking an obvious question, expecting a big answer, because it is a powerful question. You know, when we elect the president, we elect the family to live at the White House. And perhaps tonight, at the end of tonight's voting, the decision will be to elect Barack Obama, an African-American, and with him will come his family, Michelle, his wife, and of course his daughters, Sasha and Malia. They will be the first family. They will live upstairs at the White House. An African-American family upstairs at the White House. How powerful a symbol could that be?
Oh, as an African-American, it's amazing to see that our country has come to this point. But as an American in general, I'm very proud of this country inasmuch that we are really contemplating, after almost 400 years, bringing a person of color to the White House. If Senator Obama is elected, if Senator McCain is elected, we will have our first woman as vice president. It's a very appealing concept. In my own congregation, there's quite a bit of diversity. But by and large, people are really motivated to get out and be a part of the process. They realize this is a historical election. They want to go down on record as having their vote counted and having their voice heard. And that is reflected as I travel around the nation. There's a great deal of interest in this subject.
Well, you stay there, Bishop. We'll be back to you throughout the evening. David.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, now to the Obama campaign and senior advisor Stephanie Cutter. Stephanie, welcome.
Hi, David.
What is the mood like tonight in the campaign?
Well, it's great. You know, everybody is anxiously waiting for these polls to close. We know where we stand, but we feel very good. We're pleased with the turnout that's happening across the country. We're pleased at all the work that we've done to get to this point. So far, it's been a good day.
The issue of voter turnout is something we've already talked about a lot. You expect a very big turnout. We all do on both sides. Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina said high turnout in North Carolina or around the country actually helps John McCain. Does that make sense to you?
Well, it depends who the voters are, right? You know, we feel pretty good that the turnout so far, from what we're seeing, from our data, from what the exit polls are showing, that the turnout is, you know, in our favor. We think that there's an enormous amount of energy behind Barack Obama's campaign. We did enormously well in the early vote in states across the country. And, you know, from what we see, things are looking pretty good right now. But until this is over, David, you know and I know, we've been through this before. It's not over till it's over. So we are encouraging everybody to get out to the polls, no matter where you live. They're still open. Go out and vote.
Stephanie, obviously, your group would have first access, perhaps, to the information of failures, complaints, blockages of voting facilities, total breakdowns of machines, chaos, anything on that scale. Give it a grade so far. How has the voting process gone through today so far, at least as well as the campaign knows to this hour?
Well, you know, there's really no major problems to report at this point. There are things, you know, things that we're hearing across the country, but we've got people on the ground taking care of them almost immediately. You know, if I had to give it a grade, and I'm not an expert on this, but if I had to give it a grade, I'd give it maybe, you know, a B plus.
Stephanie, does your campaign hold the McCain campaign responsible for the last-minute flurry of Jeremiah Wright ads that have been running all over Pennsylvania, all over this area down here, in fact, all over cable television? It's been a saturation campaign for 2 or 3 days. And we know, of course, John McCain has forsworn that kind of campaigning. He thinks it's ethnic, racial, and he doesn't want to do it. Did they okay it? Did they say, go ahead, third party, 527, pack money, do your thing?
Well, Chris, you know how this works. You certainly don't get in the way of it. And I didn't see anybody protesting from the McCain campaign when these ads came up. You know, they certainly set the tone of this race from the start. You know, their only path to victory was to tear down Barack Obama. And I think from the turnout that we're seeing today, the energy behind our campaign, it hasn't worked.
But John McCain has not, in all fairness, John McCain has not done this. He has resisted perhaps calls within the conservative community to go after him on the ethnic front using his connection with Jeremiah Wright. And then here in the last couple of days, this saturation effort, I just wonder if you hold him responsible for that decision.
Well, you know, but Chris, you know how this works. It's not an overt decision. It's a wink and a nod. And if you don't stand up and protest, is that a wink and a nod? You know, what we do hold him responsible for is a constant negative tone of this campaign. You know, he's running 100% negative ads. You know, he, like I said, the only way he could see a path to victory was by tearing down Barack Obama. That certainly sets the tone. That makes things like the Jeremiah Wright ad okay. And, you know, like I said, I didn't see any protests coming out of that campaign over the past couple of days. These ads are running on, you know, national network and cable at a pretty high rate. So I'm sure they've seen them. You know, at the end of the day, are voters going to be watching this? Is it going to impact the vote? We hope not. So far, so good in terms of our turnout models. We've done the hard work to get here. And we're hopeful that, you know, we'll go on to victory tonight.
All right, Stephanie Cutter with the Obama campaign, thank you very much. A lot more ahead as our special coverage continues. Up next, our very first look at the exit polls, the first indication of what voters were actually thinking about today at the polls. We'll talk about it when our coverage returns right after this.
The Japanese have been coming down to Antarctica, and over the years, they've killed literally tens of thousands of whales. And what they want to do is do full-scale whaling. It's up to us to stop them.
Whale Wars premieres Friday at 9, only on Animal Planet.
It is election night at MSNBC. We're going to turn to Ann Curry now. She has our very first look at exit polling tonight. Good evening, Ann.
Good evening. Our exit polling is telling us what Americans who went to the polls so far today care most about. And here's how it's breaking down, David, nationwide. Take a look at this. An overwhelming number, 62%, told us the economy is their biggest concern. Just 10% said they're worried most about the war in Iraq. Healthcare and terrorism trailed with 9% each. We also asked voters whether they approve of the war in Iraq. And while in 2004, 51% approved, today, just 35% of voters told us they approve of the war. As for terrorism, it remains a big concern, David. In 2004, as you know, 71% of Americans said they were worried about another attack on the United States. Well, today, that number is exactly the same at 71%, according to our exit poll. So as national security is John McCain's greatest strength, we're going to see how all of this plays out tonight, David.
All right, Ann Curry looking at our exit polling tonight. Thank you very much. Rachel and Eugene, first exit poll tonight. It is just striking. They may answer that way on whether they're concerned about a terrorist strike, but when asked to list their priorities, a combined 19%, Iraq or terrorism. We're a much different country in terms of those concerns than 4 years ago, Rachel.
Sure, to see that number hold steady, the 71% concerned about terrorism, but then to see terrorism ranked lower on the overall list of concerns just means that we have an overall higher amount of anxiety as a nation. There's more things that are concerning us, even when those things are very concerning. One thing, I think it was a remarkable statement from Senator Burr that the idea that high voter turnout might benefit the Republicans in this election. That just flies in the face of all the political common wisdom of the past generation, unless you look at the early voting numbers. And the early voting numbers, we're starting to get a sense of just how huge they were, and it is astonishing. Colorado, Florida, Georgia, New Mexico, North Carolina, Nevada, those were all states won by President Bush in 2004. In all of those states, well over 50% of the total vote from 2004 has already voted just in early voting. So in order to have a prayer of holding on to those states, he has to hope that today's election day turnout is huge to try to swamp those numbers, because the McCain campaign did not really try to turn out early voters. A huge proportion of them were Obama voters.
Right, and not to pick on Senator Burr, but he especially mentioned the African-American vote in North Carolina. As of yesterday, 52% of all African-Americans registered in the state of North Carolina had already voted. I mean, not just the normal turnout, which would be 65%, something like that, of African Americans. 52% of all registered had already voted. So there aren't that many more African Americans left to throng the polls today.
Before the evening gets any longer, let's not confuse roles here. His role is not to tell us the truth. His role, no, I'm being fair here. His role is to bolster enthusiasm in his party, keep morale up all across the country. He's out on national television early in the evening in California. His job is to say we can still pull this out. The more the merrier. Let's win it. His job is not to come on here and be a political analyst.
And Chris,
that's not his job.
Literally, if all remaining voters are McCain voters, he's absolutely right. A larger turnout will really help John McCain.
Can I bring in Joe Scarborough on this? Because I think it's so interesting.
Remember, he has a job to do too.
Right. Joe, you and I have talked about this. You talk about the potential for new voters. This is the model from 2004 and the Republican Party. They created new Republicans, brought them to the polls. Your own state of Florida is an opportunity for Barack Obama to do that with not just African Americans, but younger voters and Latino voters, too.
It is stunning. The contrast between 2004 and 2008 is stunning. In 2004, at this time 4 years ago, I thought George Bush was going to win, not because of what George Bush had done, but because of what Ken Mehlman had done in getting out the vote in Florida. 4 years later, I had a top Republican official tell me on Friday as some polls were tightening. I called him up and I said, is this going to get close over the weekend? On Friday, he said, forget about it. The race is over. Barack Obama won it, and he won it early. John McCain is running a 1976-style 72-hour get-out-the-vote campaign. Barack Obama's been running that campaign for 7 weeks. Like all generals say, the war is won before the first shot is fired. There are a lot of Republicans in Florida say this race was won weeks ago when the Barack Obama campaign started organizing that get-out-the-vote effort that they did in a way that's even more astounding than what Mehlman did 4 years ago.
All right, Joe, thanks very much.
All right, let's look at some of tonight's key battleground states. For that, we turn to our political director of MSNBC and NBC News, Chuck Todd. Chuck, good evening again.
Well, I'm better studied up for you, Keith. Bring it on, brother. Bring it on. I don't agree with Oliphant on Vigo County on that one, but that's okay. Terry Hott, that's why I hadn't. I think it's more interesting to look at South Bend and in that part of the state for what it's worth, because this is heavy, culturally conservative working class vote, and it's in the sort of the outer edges of that Chicago media market, but we digress. I want to talk about 3 things tonight having to do with 2 states that we talked about earlier, and that is Virginia and Colorado. The 3 things are what I talked about earlier, how they're in the top 10. I want to show you education, the top 10 states via education here. We'll pop them up on our map. And you'll see here, with high college degrees, most of these are normally considered blue states, Minnesota, basically all of New England. And when you look here, the only ones that were red states in 04 in this top 10, Virginia and Colorado. Now let's move on and look at age. And keep the push pins up here a minute. And when you look at the age, this is the lowest amount of seniors. Well, look at another thing that has in common. That's Colorado and Virginia. So there's a young state. That seems to match what Obama's been doing well with, which is young voters. And we saw high-educated state. He's done well with college-educated whites. Again, it matches these numbers. And then the third one is income. And we'll take a look at income here in a minute. And again, here's your top 10. And notice this high income, again, not surprising here on the East Coast elite, but all of these were blue states except these 2. So it's really not surprising that this ended up being the 2 biggest targets and that these 2 ended up being the place where the Republicans started fretting the most about their electoral college, their lock that they had, or they thought that they had, was starting to break away.
What do you make of it? Is it cultural change? I guess it's intuitive that younger voters are more open, perhaps, to change, less driven by cultural, history.
Right.
And putting it nicely, education gets you more used to diversity, perhaps more socially confident than a working person that doesn't have that higher education. That's my hunch, that people who have that advantage of a college degree or even a graduate degree feel a lot more comfortable about economic and social competition than somebody who's working and doesn't have that advantage.
Well, I think the other thing is also they're transient. You know, I think it's fascinating. And one thing we don't talk about with both of our nominees, with John McCain and Barack Obama, is that they both chose their home states. You know, they are not living in the state they grew up in. And when you see where Obama's had the most success among white voters in particular, it's in states that have transient populations, right? Northern Virginia is one of those. Why is Virginia changed? You know, one of the things that I know that if you ask in polling and you looked in Virginia, Obama did really well with non-native Virginians every time I'd see polling versus folks that grew up and were born and raised in Virginia. Ditto with a place like Colorado, another place that people flock to, these growth states. And this is what should scare the Republicans, because suddenly, for 20 years, Republicans were the ones doing well in growth states. They owned the Sun Belt, right? Arizona and Texas and Florida. Now, all of a sudden, you're seeing Obama trying to make inroads in growth states. And that's why he went after Virginia, a growth state, a state that keeps growing. In Colorado, we saw polls narrow in Georgia, in Florida, and obviously Arizona, Nevada, another growth state. And that should scare the Republicans going forward if indeed Obama finds success in these growth states, because this is what carried the Republican Party for 20 years. They owned the Sun Belt, and they owned this bottom half of the country beginning in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. And if the growth states are where Obama sees himself propelled to the presidency and Democrats see themselves elect new U.S. senators, both Virginia and Colorado look like they're probably going to have Democratic senators elected there, new members of Congress coming out of Virginia and Colorado. Well, that's how they end up dominating for a 20-year period rather than just one election cycle at a time.
Chuck, that's about the most important thing I've heard in weeks. The fact is that the Democratic Party, which had been relying on the states to some extent left behind,
the shrinking
northern
states,
industrial
the older states,
where older people live. They don't have the money to retire in the South. They don't have the mobility to move, the education advantages. Their children often move away, but they stay. And now I completely think this is just really phenomenal information to have about the next several elections, maybe the next 100 elections in this country, that the competition now is extended nationwide.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think you follow this mobility trend. And look, that's why when you look, again, I go back, Obama and McCain, in some ways, they're the perfect 21st century candidates because they match a population. They were transient.
Yeah.
McCain picked his state to make his home state Arizona. Obama picked his home in Chicago. And you know what? That's what a lot of people are doing these days, particularly younger voters under 50. They're used to that. They're willing to move 3 and 4 places during their job lifetimes, their employment lifetimes. And it's there that you saw Obama able to make inroads.
Chuck, I'm throwing another curveball at you. It had nothing to do with counties in Indiana. This has to do with ballots in Virginia. And I'm wondering, is this something to anticipate, to be worried about, to think about in terms of one of those distant bells that suggest we might not have a final score tonight? The Associated Press is reporting that a federal judge has ruled that the election officials in the state of Virginia are to preserve late arriving absentee ballots that Mr. McCain's campaign claims should be counted. They said in a lawsuit that absentee ballots were not mailed on time to many military members serving overseas. The complaint asked the court to order the state to count absentee ballots from overseas troops postmarked by Tuesday, today, and received by November 14th. Should we bring our cots and sandwiches?
Well, we'll see. You know, my other favorite Virginia story today, Keith, had to do with the fact that some of these ballots were too wet because it had rained in parts of Virginia, and you're running them through the optical scan machines. And when you run a wet piece of paper through a machine, guess what? It gets jammed. So that is actually what I thought we were going to be worrying about tonight. But, you know, that military ballot gambit, in some ways, I think the McCain campaign's just, you know, this is a dotting the I, crossing the T, trying to be prepared if it's one state, if a few votes matter in Virginia. For what it's worth, I know of anecdotal evidence that the absentee ballot program was a little bit of a mess this year.
Very interesting.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. We'll all have our stories, anecdotal stories about voting. I voted early in Washington and actually went with the paper ballot and I got through the lines faster because there were a lot of electronic machines, but there were longer lines for those.
Paper ballots in New York City on many occasions because machines break through lack of use from election to election.
Exactly.
Standard stuff. This is just one of those little asterisks to put up in your constellation of stars for the rest of the evening, just in case.
All right. A lot more ahead. Coming next, our insiders, Republican strategist Mike Murphy and former Congressman Harold Ford, are going to join us for an early look at the races to watch when we return here. We are back in New York at our election headquarters here with our MSNBC Special Election Night coverage. Let's bring in our insiders, longtime Republican strategist Mike Murphy and former Democratic Congressman Harold Ford of Tennessee. Mike, let me start with you. He's not on the ballot, but he's very much a part of this race. That's President Bush. He looms very large over tonight, as he has throughout the campaign. And one of the things that we look for in this disapproval number, Ron Brownstein at Atlantic Media has crunched some of these numbers to say, what percentage of those people who disapprove of the president will go for Obama? We know that's going to be a high number. Right. What percentage of those who approve of Bush might Obama even get? And what does that portend for the outcome of the race?
Well, I think it's clearly a huge part of the equation here. I think it's such an easy story, we kind of overreact to it a little bit, I think. But there's no doubt if you're at the end of this, if Obama is to win and you did a statistical analysis, a regression analysis of the data, you would find that approval or disapproval of the president is a strongly linked variable to who you're going to vote for, no doubt about it. And I think the greatest challenge the McCain campaign had was to create an independent identity based on McCain's brand, not to be boxed in a place where he's just a Republican, because without ticket splitters today, John McCain can't win. And this is a very bad environment for ticket splitters to vote Republican because of that pressure from the president's unfavorability. You may, if you like the president, you may not like it, but it's the reality of the numbers, and it's a big factor.
And the reality here, when you have a big number, if it gets up over 70%, Harold, of people who disapprove of the president, you're starting to sweep in more than just Democrats here. You're getting into independents. You're getting into even conservatives here and giving Obama the opportunity to get the lion's share of this vote. It's a much bigger pool than it's been in past years when we look at this number.
I would agree. Some of the phenomena, two major phenomena in this race. One was the war, the narrative very early, and two, the economy and the market meltdown. Senator Obama was more closely aligned with doing something different than President Bush did. There were times in which Senator Obama was very specific about what he wanted to do, and there were times when he was not so. The advantage that he had in this, the paradigm you draw, is that he was not George Bush. I think Senator McCain's big challenge was he seemed to be embracing President Bush and running away from his original brand, which clearly has hurt him, at least in these initial polling data, the initial exit polling data. It appears the economy, the war, Barack is winning on both fronts. And if you're winning on both narratives there, it's hard to imagine how he does not come out victorious tonight.
Mike Murphy, we don't know the numbers yet tonight. We don't know what's happening. Voters still going to the polls, of course, across the country. But we do know that this turnout question is so important. And if the expectations are met, and we have something like a 14% jump in the turnout number, 130, 140 million people. Is this anything but bad news for John McCain?
Well, I think it's mixed news because either side can argue that more turnout means more of their flavor of voters shows up. The truth is, I'm going to be the one contrarian on television in America tonight saying this turnout stuff is this almost fetish we have with it is overrated. It is going to be a huge turnout election, and there are big forces here that are too big for any one campaign's drawing to an inside straight with turnout to really affect. I think when it all boils down, we are going to find that Obama bringing in new voters who are voting 2 or 3 to 1 for him is the most important new turnout factor. But the fact is, presidential elections are very different from like a local mayor's election or an off-year congressional election. They tend to be big turnout elections. So the only question here is this going to be the normal presidential big turnout or a huge turnout election? Early indications are we're heading toward a huge turnout election, which means all kinds of everybody are going to vote.
All right, Mike and Harold, a lot more from you as the evening wears on, and we'll hear from you throughout the night. Going to take another short break and be back right after this.